I remember the first time I went in the store, right after Malia was born. I was like, what? That's how much diapers cost? I remember changing diapers. You think Donald Trump ever changed a diaper? I almost said that, but I decided I shouldn't say it.
Donald Trump threw the sharpest word he had, aimed it directly at Michelle Obama, and waited for the explosion he had spent a lifetime learning to produce. Barack Obama didn't explode. He paused, and in that pause, quiet, deliberate, completely controlled, Trump's entire strategy collapsed in front of a live audience that would not stop thinking about it for weeks. The studio was the kind of place where everything is designed to look effortless. Warm light, polished surfaces, an audience packed close enough that you could feel the collective energy shift whenever something genuine broke through the performance. Cameras covered every angle. Nothing would escape. Every expression, every pause, every involuntary tightening of the jaw, preserved in real time and ready to travel. The air that night carried the particular weight of a room that doesn't yet know it is about to witness something it will replay for a very long time. The conversation had moved through pleasantries and policy and the practiced rhythms of televised dialogue. And then Donald Trump said what he said about Michelle Obama. Everything changed in that instant. Not loudly, not dramatically, just permanently. Donald Trump sat the way Donald Trump always sits in rooms like this. Forward-leaning, restless, the body language of a man who has spent decades treating every public space as terrain to be conquered before someone else claims it. His expression carried its familiar architecture, the half-smirk, the slightly lowered chin, the projection of a man who has already decided how this ends. He had perfected a single strategy over the course of his entire public life. Provocation designed to produce reaction. Throw the sharp word, aim it at something the other person values deeply, and wait. Wait for the heat. Wait for the raised voice, the visible trembling, the emotional response that could then be pointed at and labeled as weakness, instability, evidence of a person who cannot handle the weight of public life. It had worked countless times before. He depended on it. Barack Obama sat differently, still, hands quiet in his lap, eyes steady, carrying the particular calm of a man who has already decided, before entering the room, exactly how he intends to behave inside it. He didn't fill space aggressively. He occupied it with a composure that, in contrast to what sat across from him, read not as passivity, but as something far more formidable. The audience sensed the difference before either man spoke a meaningful word. The conversation had moved normally at first, the kind of surface warmth that fills a televised exchange before anything real is said. Pleasantries, light topics, the careful circling of two men who both know that the real conversation hasn't started yet. Trump controlled the early pace the way he always controls early paces, quickly, loudly, with the practiced fluency of a man who understands that the person who fills the most air in the opening minutes appears to own the room. Obama listened, unhurried, not performing patience, actually possessing it, the kind of stillness that doesn't announce itself. And then Donald Trump said it. Michelle Obama, nasty, doesn't know what she's doing. He had opened the door himself, stepped through it deliberately, and stood on the other side waiting for Barack Obama to follow him into the argument he had prepared. The room tightened. Every camera moved fractionally toward Obama's face. Obama did not follow. He paused. Not the brief pause of a man gathering his thoughts. A long, deliberate silence, filled with intention and carried with the quiet authority of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had already decided not to give it what it needed. That silence became the most powerful thing in the room. Every second of quiet made Trump's words sound smaller, more isolated, like a shout in an empty corridor that echoes not with menace, but with the particular loneliness of a sound that nobody chose to answer. Trump maintained his posture, the smirk, the restless shifting. But the cameras are merciless, and everyone watching could see the architecture of the moment. A man who had thrown a spark and was waiting for the fire that was not coming. Obama's hands stayed still, his expression stayed steady, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not sharp, not defensive, not the voice of a man rising to a provocation. It was the measured, grounded voice of someone who had decided, before the question was even finished, that the most devastating response available to him was the truth. Obama began describing Michelle Obama, not emotionally, not as a husband defending a wife from an attack, as a narrator presenting a record. He spoke about her work on education, the years dedicated to young women from the south side of Chicago all the way to the world stage, her health initiatives, the tireless consistency of her public service across 2 terms and beyond. He laid each example down with the unhurried precision of a man who knows the record well enough that he doesn't need to reach for it. He spoke facts, documented, verifiable, decades-deep facts. With each one, Trump's original comment grew smaller. The truth of Michelle Obama's record did not argue with the insult. It made the insult irrelevant. You cannot mock 30 years of documented achievement into irrelevance. The record simply exists, larger than the comment, more durable than the moment, entirely indifferent to the person who attempted to reduce it. Trump sat nearby. The smirk had become something else, harder to maintain, slightly forced, the expression of a man performing confidence in a room that was no longer watching him perform. He had expected a fight. He had been given a history lesson. He had thrown a spark expecting an explosion and received instead the unshakable evidence of a life well lived. The applause, when it came, was not the applause of a punchline. It came from somewhere deeper, the collective recognition of a room that understood it had just witnessed something true. Not politically true, not partisan true, simply, fundamentally, undeniably true. It spread because audiences know the difference between performance and reality. They feel it before they can name it. And what Obama had just delivered, the pause, the calm, the steady voice, the facts laid out without malice or heat, was so clearly the real thing that the room had no choice but to acknowledge it. Even those with no particular attachment to Obama could not avoid the effectiveness of the moment. He had not won an argument. He had made the argument unnecessary. Trump's comment faded before the evening was over. Not because it was ignored, because it failed to produce the reaction it had been designed for. A provocation that doesn't generate heat doesn't generate anything. It evaporates. And what people replayed in the hours and days that followed was not the original comment. It was the response, the pause, the quiet, the steady voice building a record, one fact at a time. People looked up Michelle Obama's record. Teachers referenced the moment in classrooms. Parents discussed it at dinner tables, not as a political event, but as a human one, as an example of what it looks like when a person under pressure chooses dignity over reaction. Trump left that room without the explosion he had come for. In every exchange that followed, every post, every rally remark, every attempt to revisit the moment, the dynamic remained the same. He referenced it. Obama didn't. Because Obama understood something Trump has never fully grasped. The person who controls the silence controls the room, and the person who controls the room controls the story. The clip traveled not because it was dramatic, because it was clear. Millions of people watched it and felt something they hadn't been expecting to feel. Not outrage, not partisan satisfaction, but something quieter and more durable. Recognition. The recognition of a man who knew exactly who he was, standing next to a man trying to tell him otherwise, and simply, completely, refusing to become the smaller version. Real strength, the moment demonstrated without stating, does not announce itself. It does not perform, or posture, or fill silences with noise. It shows up when the pressure is highest, and chooses to respond with something better. Obama chose Michelle's record over his own anger. In 60 seconds of live television, he demonstrated that the most powerful thing you can bring into a room full of noise is the unshakable quiet of knowing exactly who you are. What you just witnessed was not a debate victory, not a political moment, not a soundbite for a campaign ad. It was a demonstration of the difference between the kind of strength that shouts and the kind that doesn't need to, between a provocation designed to produce reaction and a response designed to produce truth, between a comment that evaporates and a record that endures. Donald Trump threw the sharpest word he had. Barack Obama answered with 30 years of facts. Only one of those things is still being replayed. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the moments that matter most are rarely the loudest ones, and this channel exists to make sure none of them get forgotten. The truth, spoken calmly, grounded in fact, delivered without malice, will always outlast the noise. Always.